Have you ever seen amazing terrains in D&D games and thought with extreme jealousy, why can't I create something like that? Wouldn't it be amazing to have a layout like that on your own table and be able to delight and inspire your players? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today on today's show. And this is how to be a better DM. This is the show for you to shorten the learning curve of being a dungeon master without extra time, without extra money, unless you want to, and especially without extra stress. And you can probably hear my baby in the background. So, stress is definitely something we want to lower in today's age. But I am your host today, Justin Lewis, joined today with my co host, Tanner Wayland. How's it going, Tanner?
Hey guys. Oh man, it's going so great. Just yeah, we're just happy to be here.
Exactly. We're lucky for the miracle to be here, right?
Yes. Amen. Amen, brother.
And we're also joined by a special guest today, Jay from Jay's Tabletop Terrain on Instagram. And, he is someone who has a lot of experience doing terrainscaping. So, welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to hang out with you. And yeah, I can't agree more. Every opportunity we have to hang out with people in the community, it's always a blessing. So super happy to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's
Love it.
dive right in to the main topic of terrainscaping. And, I've looked at your Instagram posts a lot. I think the first selfish question that I want to ask myself before we can get into, well, not ask myself, ask you before we get into some of our other topics is how do you have all the storage for all of the various items that you use to create your displays?
Sure. Yeah. One of the most common questions, and here's the most standard answer. I don't. Uh, that no. Honestly, in short, a lot of buckets, a lot of like tubs. I go to like Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, and I buy tubs when they're on sale, and they stack. I label them, put everything in there as neatly as I can. Sometimes it's pretty sloppy, but I just store them in tubs, and I'm fortunate to have a game room. Like if you don't have a game room,
Good.
I don't know that terrain is the route you'd want to go. But if you do, got proper storage, big closets and tubs, yeah, you're gonna be okay for a while, and then you got to start getting rid of some of the older stuff.
Uh with that in mind, so like was there ever a time when you started with this and you didn't have a game room and you had to kind of make space?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had a kitchen table, and it was like I would just sort of. My wife and I were single, or not. We didn't have kids at the time,
Yeah.
and so we were married and sort of living the young adult life where it was like our house is our house, and we keep it like as neat
Yep.
as we want. But at the same time, like you look at our dining room table, and there's going to be like a bunch of crafting stuff and that sort of thing. And yeah, I definitely had that when we were living in a very small house. And that was kind of when I first got started. And we talked about it. And that was a serious conversation we had to have, which is a good conversation of, hey, if I'm going to pursue this and try to make this like a hobby and try to make like kind of a life, like a living out of it, how are we going to do this? And so when we started having
Yeah.
kids, we got three now. It was like I have a dedicated room, and honestly, with three kids, like sometimes I don't make like all the money in the world, and it's like sometimes when I get to that, like that's a conversation we still have to revisit, like to a point where sometimes we have to sit down and say, okay, is this still working? Like is this a selfish thing on my part, or is this like can we continue to afford a room of our house to dedicate to something that's fun and not necessarily directly beneficial to everybody else in our household? So yeah, that's a conversation we actually still do have. But yeah, there was definitely a time where our dining room table was just filled with foam and paints and that sort of thing. We tried different things, and so over time, just trying different carts and buckets and stuff like that, we've kind of started to figure out how to keep it under control. So yeah, cool question.
I gotta say, I love that question and I love your response because, well, for one, I deeply relate to that as a podcaster doing this D&D thing. Even with our actual play, I don't think there's a day that goes by where I question myself, like, am I taking too much from my family? Kind of the same things of, is this still benefiting us? And I really love that you do evaluate that. And I think that's something that the hobbyist also does, right? When they have their tubs of minis or all of their source books, they're likely thinking, how do I keep doing this, making me happy, but also how do I keep my family happy? So with that in mind, for terrainscaping, right? If someone wants to get into this, but like I said, they don't want to necessarily spend as much money as Critical Role or all the fancy actual play shows. What would you say is like step 1, 2, and 3 for starting into terrainscaping in the most cheap yet still delightfully looking way?
Yeah. Cool. Step 1, I would say evaluate the why. Why do I want terrain? Right? Like my why is because I am a creator and I love to build, I love to craft, I love to paint, and I love to display things, right? Like
Yeah.
I've kind of gone through this lately of why am I posting stuff on Instagram, right? And ultimately, it's not for necessarily attention or like for myself, but it's for entertainment, right? Like I post things that I want people to enjoy, right? Like you guys do the podcast, you want people to consume it and enjoy it, right? It's not like I put something out there to take up people's mental space for 5 seconds. You know what I mean? Like I want to create and present something to people to make their lives better, right? Like that's one of my goals. I try to people I come in contact with make their lives better. And so when I create things, in part, it's for my players on the table. Like, oh my gosh, they get to come and have this great experience. They get to interact with things and play and move around and sort of have that childhood Lego feel come back to them, right? But then also the other half of the why is I want to post it so that people can enjoy it and hopefully be like inspired or just admire it for a second, be like, oh, that's really cool, I've never thought that something like that might be possible, or that sort of thing. So why is good. I would never recommend doing something without a why. Like I'm just going to start doing it. Like I'm just going to start collecting tubs of terrain. So step 1's the why. Step 2 and figure out the route you want to go. So I think it's kind of narrowed down to a point where I do both, but you're probably going to want to either go the 3D printing route, right, or the crafting route, or I say 3D printing / buying route, right? So like that entails like, am I going to save up every month and buy a bunch of Dwarven Forge and WizKids and all this stuff, or am I going to simply try to craft and like just make all of my terrain, right? And they each have their challenges, they each have their price points. That's step 2, figure out what direction you're going to go. And step 3 is ultimately just start doing. Like just my light just went out. I knew that was going to happen. But step 3 is just get a game plan and do it, right? So if I'm going to start crafting, like go to my page or go to YouTube or whatever and start finding like simple things to craft and just start doing it. Foam is cheap. I'm telling you, like it's super cheap. Like you buy a slab of 2-inch thick foam for, $30 or $40 or whatever. But then you can craft anything you want in the entire world for months and months and months. You need a knife and some glue and some very cheap paint. And I make like, I tell people all the time, like these right here, like these rides, this is pink foam. And I mean, like you can use like the first time I was doing it, I was using like thyme and basil, like ground thyme and basil for my grass and stuff like that. And then your room smells neat, I guess.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Make me hungry.
just starting with some height, like
Yeah.
there's a lot you could do with this simple block right here. Like there's 10 encounters, like there's an owlbear on top and you can have your party walking beside it, or you can have them scaling the wall or whatever. And so like just starting with like a simple visual that gives your player something to visually like latch onto. Anything, like it doesn't have to be a mountain. It could be, you could create a square and draw on windows and a door and here's a house, you know what I mean? And so ultimately the focus stays on the game, but just finding something to make or build, like that's step 3, like just doing it. You got to commit to it. Why am I doing it? Commit to it and then just do it.
Yeah. I love that, especially the why, because I love how nothing you said mentioned, "Oh, you should do it because that's what good DMs do." That has nothing to do with it because we know a lot of people who don't even like have a map. They just do it, theater of the mind. And that's probably because for them, they don't find enjoyment in making something. But
Yeah,
if you do, then it's like, hey, the journey's enjoyable, and then the end result is that your players enjoy it. It's
Right.
but like if that's not in your wheelhouse, that's fine. Like
Right.
it's okay. It's okay if you shouldn't have to do it because you feel like, oh, am I a failure as a DM or am I just like giving a bad experience? It's like, no, you can just focus on what you are passionate about. And if you happen to be passionate about terrain, I mean, I love that you were like, hey, it's actually very easy to get into.
absolutely. When you said at the beginning, step two is to decide which vein to go through, right? There's the 3D printing slash buying and then crafting. You sparked in my mind the question, is there, because obviously if you buy, Dwarven Forge, it's a lot more expensive. If you craft your own, it's less expensive, right? It's going to take a little bit more time. Have you seen, you know, a difference between the two in terms of durability?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. These two pieces right here are very similar. And this is foam and this is 3D printed. And durability wise, like something that's like 3D printed out of like filament or like dwarvenite, yeah, it stores better. It stays better longer. Um, but yeah, I mean you're paying for it, like
Mm.
you expect it to last. So yeah.
So with
I
that
have
in,
switched lately. I've switched more to 3D printing
Mhm.
everything. It's just that you mentioned it, the time investment in
Yeah.
crafting, your own, and that's just a trade off I've been able to make because of the position I'm in,
Mm.
and like having sponsors and things like that that allow me to be able to kind of get stuff without spending the the buku bucks that it typically requires. So
Yeah.
but that's been a long process, and years of crafting and doing all the things. So yeah.
So with kind of obviously the cost of having to replace things that break or whatever in mind, i- if you look at the two options, is there one that you would say is cheaper?
Hmm. Maybe. Yeah. 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 I would argue ultimately you could make um, terrain for virtually nothing. Like for like
Really?
really nothing. Like Dollar Tree has everything. Like foam core. You could buy a 3x2 sheet for $1, and it's like, man, you could just PVA glue is cheap, hot glue is cheap, paint is cheap. Like, I
Mm.
mean, you could, yeah, crafting out is cheapest, but you're paying for it in time. Like that's
Mhm.
guaranteed. You can pay for it in time. Yeah.
Hmm.
A- and with that in mind, like when you first got started, what were some of like the like simplest projects you started on?
Mhm.
Yeah, let me think. Okay, the first project I made was um a encounter. It was like a I'm this is our first kind of end of our campaign, like campaign arc, like so kind of like a quarter boss, and I made like this witch's like swamp hut out in the like out in the wilderness, and I just had a marker board, and then I just got some foam. It was like this big, it had a little hut on it, had some elevation and a little like sacrificing table, and then I made a tree out of some sticks and stuff like that, and I just put it out there, and that's when it just kind of clicked. It was like, man, this is really neat. Like we had our little Lego figures. I was like,
Mhm.
this is cool. I want to do this like more seriously. So yeah, posted a picture of it,
I, I
and here we
I
are.
love it. That's so cool, especially because like you said, it was just an encounter, and I
Mhm.
think that like for me too, when I first used some terrain, it was more of just saying like, hey, I could do this. I
Yeah,
could add I could add this tree here, and
yeah,
it would make my map three-dimensional for the first time ever. And then I started doing more, like I did a building, and I just love that you were like, hey, let's just make what we can make out of very simple stuff. I did
right.
have a question though. Um,
Sure.
in terms of like, if you are, like let's say with 3D printing where it's more durable, but also it's, I mean, you're gonna want to reuse it. Uh,
Mhm.
Mhm.
have there been certain like pieces that you were like, oh, these are a godsend because like I can just reuse them in so many ways,
Like staples.
like staples? Yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
Need a few houses, basic houses, right? Like you don't want one that is elaborate and looks crazy cool for something you're going to constantly, like, this peasant lives in this mansion that has like buttresses and, all this stuff. Like, get some basic houses, get some stackers like this. And then let's see what else. Some trees. You need some good trees. They don't have to be the best of trees. Like you can make them like those little ones that you can find at, like Hobby Lobby or whatever, that
Yeah,
make your own trees or whatever. Trees, stackers, houses. Man, like what more could you need for really any
yeah,
encounter? Like maybe some dungeon tiles, maybe.
maybe,
But at that point, I just draw it out sometimes.
yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't it be nice to have someone in your corner as a dungeon master? Maybe having someone who can help you find solutions to your DMing problems and help you improve every aspect of your game. Maybe someone who has a pretty good Al Pacino impersonation from his part in Any Given Sunday. Well, here at How to Be a Better DM, we are doing an experiment. We are offering 5 free coaching sessions to separate listeners of the show. During these coaching sessions, we'll work with you through your strengths and weaknesses as a DM to help you generate a game plan to make both better. You can either send in a recording of one of your games, or we'll attend it live if able. If all else fails, we can still chat about what you struggle with and talk with you through any prep you've done for your upcoming games to help you be better. If you're interested for one of these 5 free coaching sessions, go to sessionzerostudios.com/coaching and sign up. Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right. We're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom. So actually, that brings up a really good point. A lot of people use sort of minis and terrain as stand-ins for kind of battle maps, right? Well, not stand-ins, but like as battle maps, and they use it in tactical ways. So with the things that you create, do you normally like put down a grid? Do you just kind of measure things out like war game style? How do you handle the tactical measurements and calculations that are needed during combat?
Yeah, no, Justin, that's a really good question. I was hoping you guys would ask, and if not, I was going to try to like bring it in and work with you. And there's like, you probably get this, Tanner, on like when you use terrain. Like there's different ways you're going to use it. So like, is it for a combat situation, right? Like, or a tactical like puzzle situation where you need a grid to like really measure things out. I don't remember where I heard this method, but I use pipe cleaners, right? And so like I'll measure them out for whatever my player's movement speed is and cut it off at that. And then I'll say like, okay, like here's your pipe cleaner. Like you can bend it so you can know how far they can move and that sort of thing. And they just sort of follow that line. And so when I don't have a grid, we'll use like pipe cleaners for that. It's like, what better measurement tool do you have, And
I
then,
love that.
and like, I didn't come up with that. I heard that somewhere. Sorry, I can't remember. So if somebody knows, great. But that's what I use. And then I also like, you'll see the full table setups. Like this is the biggest, hardest argument I have to present to people. They're like, there's just, you set up this table and then like, they don't want to go there. You're just railroading your players. I'm like, no, like, it's not like that. I'll do it. Like my full table setup is a visual, right? Like it's a picture. I can't put a world on my table. It's a picture of where my players are at. Okay. And so like I'll have it set up in different sections that don't represent the scape of the world. But if I know my players are probably going to be in this village and they're probably going to be following the tip that they picked up to this cave, right? And then after that, they'll probably head into the forest to find the dragon or whatever, right? Like I'll have my village set up over here.
Mhm.
And then a foot away, I'll have this cave probably covered with cardboard or something like that. And then I'll have my forest set up over here. And I'll say, okay, like this is not, 100 feet away from this village, but it represents a visual that you can see like, okay, we're here now. And then your mind kind of like wraps, you do the travel scenario, whatever, and then we're over here. And so it's like, I try to set up 4 or 5 encounters on every table setup I do, on based on like what I think my players are going to do. So like it's not always gridded because it doesn't necessarily represent scale, right? It just
Yeah.
represents a picture of where they're at, a visual representation of I'm in a village, gives me some ideas about what it looks like and like the general kind of features of it. Yeah, I definitely don't put my world on the table, and I definitely don't railroad my players. Like, I get that question all the time. Like, what do you do if your players don't want to do the encounters that you have set up? We go theater of the mind. Like, not that hard. We do
Yeah.
like we do what my players want to do, like,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not
Yeah.
mad when they don't want to do the things I have that I think they're going to do.
And it's kind of nice that you do it almost like modular, where it's like, hey, I do have like separate little sections. Because I've seen a lot of people do this. I've been meaning to do this, where they'll have it set up like this separate area or encounter on a separate board. And then when they're ready for it and the players actually are going with that, they just
Mhm.
plop it right on. And I think that saves you a lot of time in the moment. And then, if they don't use it this week, you'll probably use it next week, right?
Exactly. And that's how I try to think of it. I basically have 5 boards laid out on my table, and they're blended together with trees and terrain and stuff like that. That's all it is.
See, I think one thing that like we haven't really mentioned, but I really should say it because it's sort of one of the undercurrents of this entire conversation. And I think we maybe did mention it, but I just maybe want to emphasize it is everything that you've described, everything you do is because one, you think it's cool to do and it's fun and it's for your players too, right? Also, you have your vocational considerations for you that you have to take pictures of. But those 2 first ones, right? That is huge because I think dungeon masters, we fall in under kind of I don't really like to call it Matt Mercer syndrome, but like, the actual play comparison where you're like, oh, I need to have this because they have this on NADPOD or, all the other things. I just think it's so cool that you are so focused on your players. And as a dungeon master, like listener, whatever you think is cool and whatever your players think is cool, that's what you should do, even if it's corny, right? Even if you're like, you know what? I'm going to use this. And actually, like a funny example for one time, one of the I have a 3D printer too. I printed like a octopus little thing with like the articulating arms and whatnot, right? But the head was Dwayne the Rock Johnson. It was the Rocktopus, right? And I used that just as like a BBG or whatever. And my players thought it was so funny. It didn't look anything like what I was actually having them fight, but like I had it. It was fun, and it made the whole thing memorable, So just remember that, listener. Anyways, looks like we actually are at our time limit. I know, Jay, you have kind of a hard stop. I feel like that went super, super fast. Like we didn't talk about near enough of the content. So maybe we'll have to do this again. But
I was to say, let's do it again because I have some questions for you guys. And I think you guys have a lot of valuable insight in there that we could pull out as well for people looking to train and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Sorry, I got to go.
No, it's okay. Right? Before you take off, we do need you to shout out to the audience. Where can they find you, support you, see what you're up to, and so on? Yeah,
for sure. Over on Instagram at Jays_tabletop. You see the logo there, and come say hi. My favorite part is actually talking to people. Like, people don't send me messages sometimes because they think I'm not going to respond. I'm going to respond, and it might be a couple days later, but I love people. Like, everything I do is around people. I'm a people person. I love to serve, love to make people better, and I love to help people. So send me a message. However I can help you out, that's what I like to do. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Love it.
Jay. Tanner,
Yeah,
if you want to
thank
stick
you.
around, we can kind of continue talking shop if you're up for it. But thanks, Jay,
Perfect.
and take care. We'll be in touch, and we'll get something like this set up again, or maybe we'll just
Okay.
play a game together. I don't know. That'd be fun too. So
We'll have to do your scenario next time. Your 15-second.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
appreciate you guys. Thanks for what you do. Best to
Thanks,
you.
Jay. Take care.
See you, Jay.
Bye.
Well, Justin, with Jay gone, and with us having a second here, I just wanted to talk about kind of bring it home a little bit, because our podcast is about being a better DM, and specifically like how we can tell better stories. And I think that sometimes when you look at terrainscaping and building out your encounters, your map, uh, you can kind of lose sight that like, hey, this should actually add to the story. Um, eh, so like for someone who's like, oh, isn't it just purely visual? Like, how would you respond to that? How does terrain add to your storytelling?
Right. Well, the first thing I would say is no, it's not purely visual, and that's because what we're doing is not about the terrain, if that makes sense. And I think that's one mistake a lot of people might make is you make this really cool piece or this set and you try however you do to make it about the piece. And I think actually I did this myself. So I crafted out of foam kind of like the interior of a tavern, right? It looked really cool. I think I threw it away a little bit ago because it got old and stuff. But in some encounters that where I used it, I think I tried to focus my players too much on it and sort of get props and whatnot. But like going back to what Jay said, it's not visual because you're focusing on what the characters and the players want to do. If they don't want to use the terrain, then you don't. But if they want to use the terrain, you weave a story around it. And the story and the players and how everyone's feeling, I think that's the magic.
Yeah, I agree. I think bringing it back to the players is important because I think especially in an encounter, having terrain can be, the difference between like, oh, I fire another bow shot, and that's it, and you just say that over and over again, or you say like, hey, I do a spell. It's the difference between that and being like, okay, my character is going to scale this cliff,
Mhm.
and then he's going to look down at this group of enemy. It becomes a lot more epic, right? It becomes something that you totally see in Lord of the Rings or another movie, right? Because it has movement, it has place, it has setting. And I mean, there's a reason why like every great book out there like just kills it in the setting because like it helps you visualize things, and then when the characters are doing things within the setting, that becomes the story. And so I think that it's just so important. Like for example, Jay was talking about one of his first times doing this when he was doing a witch's hut, a tree, like a little bit of a riser there, and he made like a little bit of a swamp. And I was thinking about that. I was like, it's so simple, but like, I mean, anyone could do that. It might take you a second, listener, because if you've never done this, but it's totally within your capabilities of doing a scene like that. Uh, and you might think, well, yeah, but it's not like, it's not a bunch of houses that you can take the roof off of. I can see everything inside of it, like Matt Mercer or Dimension 20 or whatever, right? But but at the end of the day, it's like, hey, listen, what you're trying to do is create a setting. And as much as your words can do that, also having a visual just helps your words. It kind of gives them the lift that they need so that players can put themselves in the scene. They can describe their actions more thoroughly, right? And and then that actually, like, you might not always see the A to B to C of it all, but it does make it so that your players can have more like engage in better role playing and better, encounters, and it shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, it's taking this theoretical setting and making it three-dimensional, right? In some way, shape, or
Yes.
form, even a little bit, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, because like not everybody like especially if you're just playing with your friends or
Mhm.
it's a new group or something. I think there's some great groups out there that do theater of the mind very well, and
Mhm.
everybody has kind of like learned that, and they learn how to make up for that with very descriptive, uh, like exposition of what their players are doing or with their characters and their monsters and everything else. Uh, But on the other hand, you might not know that one of your players is not fully into it just because like they do have that problem with like visualizing.
Yeah.
I know lots of people that have a hard time visualizing things, and and so like if you don't try, then you might not know that like, hey, your players would actually really enjoy this, even if it's just a tree that you're
Yeah.
adding to a map, right? Or just a house that you 3D printed or bought, or heck, you just like took a box and put it on your table, and it's a house now. Whatever it is, it's worth starting and seeing how it goes, because you could end up like Jay. You could end up like loving it so much and loving the creative aspect of it that you just keep going, and then all your maps look amazing, right?
Absolutely. Honestly, I think that is also one thing that might be a little dangerous about this, is because it's kind of seductive, right?
Yeah.
Like like it looks super cool and it looks really fun to do. So try it out and don't beat yourself up if you don't end up liking it or you don't feel like you're up to the task. On a super side note, Tanner, do you think it would be like a fun idea to do sort of Bob Ross esque terrain making videos on our Patreon, except we don't have as much skill as Bob Ross, and
I know.
we
I was
know
like,
that.
what do you call it when the trees don't look so happy,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the person doing it isn't so happy either, and they're like, gosh darn it, why can't I get this to work?
yeah. It's like, and now we're gonna paint, a happy little mistake over in this corner here. Oh, that's a good
That's a
mistake. Oh,
great mistake.
exactly. So, listener,
I'm not opposed. Like,
yeah, I think it'd be funny and
I
fun.
mean, we've talked about Caden. As you guys know, the other host, Caden, he's big into painting, and he does a
Mhm.
great job,
He
fantastic
does.
job, with minis and everything. But it could be fun, getting a little bit more on level terrain by just being like, hey, we have a bunch of foam. Go to town, like,
Yeah. No, I
and
think I think that would be a super good idea.
yeah, so I think that's a fun idea, especially where this is a little bit of spoilers, but we are uh, going to be launching a some new content slash a new tier for Patreon, where we're going to be giving some DM guides and tips and everything. I think that'd be super fun to like do videos of us messing up. It's kind of like the Try Guys.
No.
Listen, if you guys know these guys, they're YouTubers and they do various things. They're pretty big, but they have a segment where they try and bake stuff without like a recipe. Like
Yeah.
they'll try and do donuts or cake or who
Oh,
knows what,
geez.
right?
Yeah.
And most of the time it's like terrible, but it is fun watching them like mess up. That could be what we do, and that could be fun. Hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, listener, stay tuned because we have some fun things coming out in the future, definitely with some fun other guest shows. For example, here's a spoiler: we're coming out with a show specifically with a voice acting coach. We're also coming out with the show from with Jay from Swole Initiative again on Instagram, and probably a show with Dan Wells, author Dan Wells. We're still scheduling that out. So we got some really cool things coming down the pipes. As always, though, we do need your help, specifically telling us what you like and what you care about. So, listen to the episodes you really care about. Don't listen to the episodes you don't care about. Message us on Instagram or email. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Join the Discord. Do all the things so that way we can get you awesome content and serve you because we're not worthy. You know, sorry, I drifted into Wayne's world there. But
Oh no.
anything else you'd like to add, Tanner, before we close up today?
Yeah, I would just like I said at the start, if terrainscaping is not your passion,
Mhm.
don't beat yourself up. Like that's fine. Like everybody has different skills. But on the other hand, you don't know if it might be your passion until you try it a little bit, right? So, grab small things around the house that you have. Like maybe you have like the inner roll of a toilet paper thing. Maybe you use that somehow. Turn it
Mhm.
into a little tree. Maybe you take a little leftover box and just paint it a little bit with some paints lying around the house. Whatever it is, give it a try and see, if your players like get a kick out of it. That might just be the kick that you need to get into this.
Heck yeah. Well, I can't add anything else, listener. All I just got to say is you look pretty good today, Mr. Listener. or Mrs. Listener, whoever you are. Hopefully that's not inappropriate, but probably going to edit that out. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode. Truly amazing. Until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.